The bullet that nearly killed Captain Kurt Greiner arrived at 2:11 on October 16, 1944, when Rovaniemi was burning like kindling stacked for winter. He never heard it coming. What he heard was brick cracking beside his face, the gritty sting of fragments across his cheek, and then, late, the distant rifle report as if the sound itself had been delayed by the cold. Kurt dropped into soot-black snow and stayed flat, because Finland had signed its armistice with the Soviets on September 19th, and the clock inside every order had started ticking. The Finns had promised to drive Germans out, and the Germans had promised to leave nothing useful behind. Politics became a rifle at 800 meters, and the forest did not explain why. Fire rolled through the rail yard in pulses. Somewhere near the station, an ammunition car was cooking off, each dull thump pushing orange light into the low clouds. Kurt had heard staff officers later call it an accident, as if a burning munitions train were a weather event. In the moment, it felt like the town itself had been rigged to ignite, because the houses were timber and tar, and the streets were narrow, and everything was dry despite the snow. Every blast threw new embers into the wind, and the embers did what embers always did. They found the next roof. A tracked tractor, one of the small Raupenschlepper Ost machines meant for mud and salvage, clattered past the alley mouth, towing a sled stacked with wooden crates. Two more followed. The crates were plain except for red wax seals and paper labels that did not belong in a retreat. Kurt crawled to the nearest sled and read one label by matchlight cupped in his hand. Bank of Finland, Rovaniemi branch. Below it sat a German stamp in fresh ink, the kind used for secret state matter. He did not know whose decision had put a bank's reserves into an army convoy, but he knew the physics of what it meant. If the crates held standard bars, each one would weigh 12.5 kilograms. A man could carry one bar if he was fed. These men were already living on thin soup and whatever bread the kitchens could bake before the town turned to ash. "Captain Greiner?" A voice spoke from the darkness behind him, close enough that Kurt smelled tobacco and oiled leather. He rolled and found a tall military policeman in field grey with a black sleeve band. The man's face was too calm for a town on fire. "Lieutenant Othmar Voss," he said. "Security liaison." Voss shoved a damp folder into Kurt's hands. Inside were custody forms, carbon copies, crate numbers, seal numbers, and a signature line already waiting. The header carried the red stamp again. Kurt's first impulse was to demand an inspection, to open a crate and verify what he was being made responsible for. The second impulse was stronger. Do not create a delay that gives someone an excuse to shoot you in the street. "I need to see," Kurt began. "You will not open the crates," Voss said. "You will sign. The schedule is tight. Headquarters has shifted from the older withdrawal plan to Operation Nordlicht. We move before dawn." Kurt signed. The pen scraped wet paper. The act felt less like authority than like a shackle closing. When he handed the folder back, Voss leaned in until Kurt could see ice crystals caught in the man's eyelashes. "If the cargo is lost," Voss said softly, "you do not set foot in Norway. Are we clear?" Kurt understood the sentence for what it was. Not a threat of punishment later, but a promise of disposal now. "Clear," he said. By 300 hours, Kurt had his detachment assembled beside the tractors. A dozen mountain infantrymen with skis strapped to their packs. A medic, a radio operator, and Hermann, his senior non-commissioned officer, a thick-handed veteran whose calm had carried men through worse roads than this. Kurt walked the line, turning panic into tasks. He checked fuel cans for gel, ordered Arctic oil mixed with ski wax rubbed into rifle bolts, and made every man cinch his straps until the load sat as high as it could without choking him. Each correction brought a little survivability. Each one cost minutes, and minutes in Lapland were spent in temperature. Kurt's usefulness came from an earlier life that had nothing to do with ideology. He had grown up in a Bavarian mining valley where men spoke in weights and angles because gravity punished arrogance. His father had taught him that a load was not an object. It was a promise your joints would have to keep. In the mountain troops, that lesson became habit. Reduce the world to what can be carried, and make the carry honest. At 3:12, the convoy rolled out. Rovaniemi receded behind them in smoke and popping blasts, and the road north became a frozen ribbon through black spruce. Kurt rode in the lead tractor beside the driver, one hand on his map case, the other on the radio handset that crackled with fragments, burned bridges ahead, Finns cutting telephone lines, engineers ordered to deny everything that might help a pursuer. The policy had a name, scorched earth. But what Kurt saw were half-sawn timbers and smashed windows, as if someone were trying to erase the life of the land before leaving it. At a river crossing, an engineer platoon was already at work with calm hands. Kurt watched them set charges into the timbers under the bridge deck, not rushing, not hesitating, as if destroying a structure was simply another kind of construction. A Finnish farm cart stood abandoned on the far bank, its harness cut, its horse gone. The bridge would go after Kurt crossed, and anyone behind him, Finnish patrol, German straggler, civilian, would inherit the gap. The crossing bought Kurt a narrow lead. It cost him the uneasy knowledge that his own army was turning the country into a maze of dead ends. The first tractor failure came before sunrise. The second machine began to lag, engine note dropping as fuel refused to atomize. The driver worked the throttle like a man pumping blood through a failing heart. The engine coughed, shuddered, and died. Kurt halted the column under the trees and knelt by the engine. The sound was not a simple freeze. It was starvation, bad fuel, water in the mix, something that would not burn clean at this temperature. He could coax it for an hour and it would die again, farther out, deeper in a country that was now hostile. He stood and gave the order that cut into his men like a wire saw. "Transfer the crates. Leave the tractor." The men obeyed. They levered sealed boxes onto the remaining sleds, breath bursting white, boots slipping on packed snow. Each thud of a crate on wood sounded like a coffin being set down. They moved again, heavier, slower, their own tracks marking the road behind them like a confession. By noon they reached a place where the road widened near a cut bank, and Kurt saw the first message left by the new enemy, a road sign chopped down and laid across a side track in a neat X, and beside it a small pile of cleaned brass casings gleaming in the snow. The shooters were not visible. Their presence was. Kurt ordered wider spacing and more scouts. The detachment gained control. The cold took the payment in time. That night, in a spruce stand that gave some shelter from wind, Voss appeared beside Kurt's sleds. He held out a message strip. Nordlicht confirmed. Accelerate. No explanation, no sympathy, only a tighter schedule. Kurt folded the strip into his map case and lay down with the gold a few meters away, listening to the trees creak. He understood something then that he did not yet say aloud. The mission was not being measured in kilometers. It was being measured in how thoroughly it could break a man without leaving a witness. On October 22nd, the second tractor failed in a way that ended debate. A gear tooth sheared with a grinding scream, and the machine became dead weight. Kurt stared at the stalled tracks and felt the trap close. Their road was a thin line. Each abandoned vehicle narrowed it further. He gathered the men under the trees and said the words that turned a retreat into a march of punishment. "We go on skis. The cargo goes with us." No one argued at first because the alternative, staying with dead machines, was a clean death, but Herman cleared his throat. "Captain, the load." Kurt cut him off by tapping the folder Voss had forced into his hands. "This is the load," he said, "and it is our necks." They broke the crates open because they had to. The pry bars bit into wood. Inside, wrapped in oil paper, the bars lay stacked like bricks. Each carried a stamped eagle, and each radiated cold so absolute it felt dry. A glove tore on a nail. Bare skin touched gold. A man yanked back screaming and left a patch of skin behind. Kurt shoved him toward the medic and ordered rags, socks, anything that could keep flesh from metal. The gold demanded careful handling. It also demanded a price. They built improvised packs and divided weight. 1 bar to the strongest men, half to the ones already limping, and 2 to those whose pride refused mercy. The distribution solved the problem of movement. It created a new problem of hatred. They set out in single file, skis whispering over snow, poles punching holes in crust. Kurt navigated by compass and by the shape of trees, because in the north the land could swallow direction whole. Each day he enforced routine, wipe moisture, work rifle bolts, smear Arctic oil mixed with ski wax, because a frozen action could kill as surely as an unseen shooter. The routine kept weapons functional. It slowed the march. Slowness gave the Finns room. The Finns did not announce themselves with a charge. They taught their lesson with a single shot. On the 3rd day of ski march, a crack sounded from the rear and a man folded down as if the snow had softened. Blood pushed through his trousers in bright, impossible red. The bullet had shattered the kneecap cleanly, not a killing shot, a decision shot. Kurt threw smoke and ordered return fire into the trees. The trees did not answer. The shooter was already gone, or never where sound suggested. The evidence was the man on the snow, teeth chattering, eyes wide, a joint turned to ruin. Herman crawled up beside Kurt. "We can make a litter," he said. Kurt saw the equation instantly. A litter meant 2 men carrying. 2 men meant more gold redistributed. More redistribution meant slower movement for everyone. Slow meant more knee shots until no one moved at all. Kurt pressed a morphine syringe into the wounded man's hand and closed the fingers around it. He placed the man's rifle within reach. "Wait for dark," Kurt said, because the other words would have made him human in a way he could not afford. Then he ordered the line forward. The sound of skis covered the small noises the wounded man made behind them. Kurt did not turn around. If he turned around, he would stop. If he stopped, the Finns would do to the whole detachment what they had just done to one knee. An hour later, they found a birch sapling with a strip of paper nailed to it at eye level, placed there in a way that meant the nail had been driven without haste. Kurt tore the paper off and read the Swedish first, because his school German had taught him enough of it. "Leave the metal," it said. "Walk home." Below, in rough German, someone had added a second line. "You are not being hunted for your uniforms. You are being hunted for what you carry." The note did not prove the Finns knew the details of his cargo, but it proved they understood the pressure points. It also proved they were close enough to leave messages on his line of march. Kurt burned the paper in his palm until it curled black, because letting his men read it would have been another kind of surrender. After that, the Finns only needed to repeat the lesson occasionally. Every few days, a crack from the tree line, another shattered knee, another anchor created. Kurt's decisions became colder, and the detachment's trust in him thinned. Men began to look at the gold on their backs as if it were a living thing that had chosen them. The cold deepened. Wind rose and drove snow sideways, erasing their trail as if the land wanted to deny they had existed. Hunger made tempers sharp. At halts, Kurt watched men rub their shoulders as if trying to grind pain out of bone. He tightened straps, redistributed loads by ounces, and listened to the complaints that never quite became mutiny. The measures kept them moving. The movement consumed them. At the end of October, Emil crawled into Kurt's shelter with a strip of paper he had written by gloved hand. The battery was dying. The message was fragments. The fragments were enough. "Nordlicht schedule strict," it said. "Ports compromised. No sea lift likely." Kurt read it twice. Gold could buy fuel only if fuel could be delivered. If the sea routes were failing, then the cargo he was hauling was not a reserve. It was ballast. He had seen the consequence of Tornio in the way the staff spoke on the radio. Clipped, urgent, full of references to roads suddenly unsafe and depots suddenly gone. The landing at the Gulf of Bothnia had cut across the clean geometry of a retreat and turned it into improvisation. A schedule like Nordlicht could survive a map. It could not survive a moving enemy and a coastline that no longer belonged to you. Kurt pictured gold bars stacked on a Norwegian pier, waiting for ships that would never come, and felt his shoulders ache under a weight that had not yet fully arrived. He hid the strip inside his boot, because paper was light but dangerous. If Voss saw it, Voss would not argue the logic. Voss would tighten the leash. The next morning Herman approached with frost in his beard and a look that was too careful. "Men are talking," he said. "They can talk in Norway," Kurt answered, though he no longer believed Norway meant safety. "They're talking about burying," Herman said. The word landed with weight. Burying meant theft. Burying meant evidence disappearing into tundra. Burying meant Kurt returning, if he returned at all, as the only living man with a signature on the forms. "Who put that in their heads?" Kurt asked. Herman did not answer. His silence pointed at the same direction Kurt had begun to suspect since Rovaniemi: procedure. 2 days later, the discussion stopped being talk. At a halt, when men stripped sweat-wet shirts to keep them from freezing, Kurt stepped away to check bearing and returned to see Herman crouched over an open pack, a gold bar in his hands. Another bar lay on the snow. The pack strap had been cut clean. Herman looked up and did not drop the bar. "Captain," he began, as if this were a briefing. Kurt saw men nearby, frozen in place, eyes fixed on the metal, not because it was beautiful, because it was heavy, and they were starving, and heaviness becomes a kind of insult. "If we bury some," Herman said, "we move faster, we keep ammunition, we live." Kurt stepped closer and saw a detail that chilled him more than the air. A deliberate slit in Herman's glove palm, made so he could touch the gold directly. Herman had crossed a line in his own head. The gold was no longer cargo, it was entitlement. Kurt drew his pistol. The movement was calm, trained. Stillness snapped into place around him. "Put it down," Kurt said. Herman shifted the bar in his hands and looked past Kurt, searching for something. Kurt followed the gaze and saw Voss at the edge of the shelter line, watching as if waiting for an answer to a question he had already asked. Kurt understood then. Voss did not need the Finns to destroy the detachment. He needed the detachment to destroy itself, with Kurt at the center holding the smoking piece. Herman's eyes flickered with calculation. He believed Kurt would not fire. He believed a captain would protect the unit's cohesion over a stamped form. Kurt fired once. Herman folded to his knees. The bar fell with a dull thud that sounded like a door closing. Herman tried to speak. Blood bubbled at his lip. He went still. No one moved. The wind hissed through birch. The detachment remained standing, alive, because Kurt had done the thing that made them fear him again. The cost was that Kurt felt something inside him go quiet, as if a part of him had accepted that honor was a luxury of warm rooms. He picked up the bar and wrapped it, because leaving it out would invite the same hunger in other hands. Then he took the ledger page with his signature and tore off the corner with the crate number, chewed the paper to pulp, and swallowed it. He could not unsign the form. He could at least make it harder to read. When the men finally broke their stillness, Kurt ordered 2 of them to drag Herman's body away from the shelter line and cover it with snow. He did not permit a prayer. He did not permit a speech. The detachment had no spare warmth for ritual. Still, he knelt once beside the corpse and searched Herman's pockets, because an officer who did not look became a man who guessed. In Herman's inner pocket, he found a folded scrap of paper protected in oilcloth, a list of crate numbers and seal numbers copied by hand, and beside it, 2 letters, V, V, written like initials. Kurt did not need a confession. He needed only the confirmation that procedure had hands, and those hands were inside his unit. He tucked the scrap into his own coat, not as evidence he could use, but as a reminder of what kind of game he had been forced into. By mid-November, the cold sharpened into a tool. The temperature slid toward -30, and the men's breath hung in the air in thick plumes that betrayed their positions in calm moments. Beards stiffened with ice. Eyelashes froze together. The gold felt heavier, not because it changed, but because the bodies carrying it were failing. On November 13th, Emil warmed the radio battery under his shirt long enough to pull in a staff relay. He crawled to Kurt with the handset pressed to his chest as if it were a wounded animal, and handed over a strip written in pencil, letters shaking with cold. Nordlicht accelerated, it said. Lingen line priority. Transfer point evacuated. No sea lift. Destroy sensitive cargo if threatened. Kurt read no sea lift and felt the mission collapse in his hands. Without ships, gold could not become fuel or food or ammunition. It could only remain what it had always been, mass. Someone had chosen to make mass the last burden a detachment would carry. Voss appeared at dusk, as if the message had a scent. "You received traffic," he said. "It concerns schedule," Kurt answered. "It concerns your responsibility," Voss replied. 5 kilometers to Norway if the ground holds. The cargo arrives." Kurt looked at the men crouched in snow, their packs like tumors on their shoulders, and understood with a clarity that was almost mercy. Arriving was not the point. Being unable to explain was the point. A sealed cargo carried into the dark and never accounted for in any clean way solved problems for people far above Kurt's rank. That night he chose ground. He told the men they would stop running and make the Finns pay in minutes instead of kilometers. The decision gave the detachment a plan. The plan cost the last illusion that speed would save them. Before dawn, they reached a low, unnamed ridge of rock and frozen earth with a shallow dugout that might once been a Finnish position. It offered sightlines and little else. Kurt looked at it and knew it would not hold against mortars. He also knew they had nothing better. A kilometer behind them, half buried in drift, Kurt had passed a boundary marker, stone with faded paint, pointing toward Norway. It should have been a promise. Instead, it felt like a taunt, because the men could see the line and still not cross it. The ridge was close enough that Kurt could imagine the other side. Roads that might still be open, depots that might still exist, officers who would ask for paperwork before offering food. The thought gave him direction. It also gave him nausea. The Finns entered the story as physics. At first light, a bullet chipped rock near Kurt's head. Another snapped a birch twig. The shooters stayed invisible, moving on skis with energy Kurt's exhausted men could not match. The fire pattern was patient, spaced to make Kurt stay down, to make him wait for the next impact. Kurt crawled to the machine gun position and saw the fatal weakness. Frozen earth walls, thin planks, no real protection. A mortar round would collapse the place. A rifle round could punch through the roof. He looked at the stacked packs behind them and, for the first time, saw the gold stripped of its lie. Hard, dense metal. A bullet stop. "Bring the bars," he ordered. The men tore open packs and passed bars hand to hand. Gold clanged on rock, too bright a sound for the tundra. They built a low wall along the dugout lip and around the machine gun embrasure, stacking yellow bricks where wood would splinter. Each bar placed brought millimeters of protection. Each bar placed cost strength they did not have. The first mortar round arrived late morning. Kurt did not see the tube or crew. He heard the incoming hiss, then felt the ground lift as the blast punched frozen earth outward like shrapnel. A gold bar shifted under concussion and crushed the fingers of the man bracing it. The man screamed. Blood smeared black on yellow. Kurt dragged him back and wrapped the hand. The wall demanded payment in flesh. They kept stacking because stopping would make every prior sacrifice worthless. Between impacts, Voss crawled into the dugout with the folder tucked under his coat like a priest protecting scripture. "You will account for every bar," he said, voice controlled. Kurt reached into his own coat and produced the brass stamp plate that had come with the forms, the little block used to imprint crate numbers. He had carried it because he feared it. Now he understood it was a tether. If he lived, it would drag him back into a courtroom of paperwork where the only question would be why the numbers did not match. He raised the brass block and slammed it against a gold bar. Brass dented. Gold barely noticed. He struck again until the stamp cracked and the letters became meaningless fragments. Voss's eyes tightened. "That is destruction of state property," he said. "So is burning a town," Kurt replied, and the words tasted like smoke. Another mortar impact showered them with frozen clods. Voss flinched. The flinch was small, but it proved what Kurt needed proved. Procedure did not make a man immune to physics. It only hid him behind other men's obedience. Kurt took the machine gun grips and fired short, controlled bursts at gaps where he saw snow puff with movement. He did not expect to hit a man he could not see. He expected to force the enemy to treat the dugout as a problem that could still bite. Each burst cost ammunition. Each burst bought seconds of the Finns keeping their heads down. Around noon, Emil crawled over, face grey. "Battery dead," he said. "No more messages." Kurt nodded. The radio dying meant no more orders, no more record, no more warm voices rearranging the world. What happened here would not be neatly written down by anyone who mattered. The Finns tightened the ring. Kurt could feel it in angles of fire and in the way bullets began to arrive from slightly different directions, as if skis were tracing a circle around the ridge. He could not see the shooters. He could see their effect, splinters, chips, the sudden stillness that fell on men when they realized they were being measured. By mid-afternoon, the gold wall had changed the equation. Rifle rounds struck metal and died with a flat smack. Shards of lead spattered. The bars absorbed the violence without complaint. The wall did not win. It simply made the enemy spend more. The cost came in heat. Men stripped gloves to handle bars, and each time cloth touched metal it stole warmth. Frostbite crept onto cheeks in pale patches. One man began shaking uncontrollably, and Kurt recognized hypothermia as a quiet surrender, not a dramatic collapse. A mortar round landed directly on the dugout lip. The blast drove 2 gold bars inward like pistons. One slammed into Kurt's left shoulder and pinned him against earth. Pain flared hot in a world that had been nothing but cold. He tried to push the bar away, and his hand slipped on a metal slick with blood and dirt. The machine gun went silent. Kurt's mind reached for one last task. He tore Emil's message strip into pieces and ground them into wet earth beneath his chest. Because if he could not save men, he could at least deny someone a clean story. The sound of skis on hard snow came closer, crisp and controlled. Finnish voices carried in short bursts. A rifle bolt clicked. Kurt could not lift his weapon. He could barely breathe. Voss's voice, strained now, came from his right. "Captain," he said, "the inventory." Kurt tried to laugh and produced only a wet cough. The gold above him did not care about inventory. It cared only about mass. The final shot came close enough that he heard it clearly, a single punctuation mark in the wind. Then the world narrowed to cold metal and packed earth pressing down, steady and indifferent. The ridge took the rest, and the tundra began the quiet work it always did, sealing what men could not carry and could not confess.